Hi everyone, welcome to a crossover episode of Decloak Podcast and Metomic. My very special guest today is Jake Bernardez, CISO of Anecdotes.ai. And special thank you to Metomic and our guests for joining us, and for Metomic for sponsoring today's episode and session. So our main core topic is going to be navigating CISO challenges. We're going to narrow that down to burnout, limited authority in building resilience and cybersecurity leadership. And today, we're hoping to discuss the overlooked aspects of a CISO's position, including CISO burnout, managing a role that's C-suite in title, but not always in authority, and building resilience to support long-term success. So we're going to jump right in to Jake. How are you, Jake? You okay?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Good, good. I thought we'd just open with a cheesy opener there.
I should note as well that I was saying on the table is that Anecdotes AI. We were actually an AI company when we launched in 2020 and had absolutely no AI functionality whatsoever. Talk about forward thinking.
I know, you're ahead of the curve. So let's jump into our first topic, and then we'll go around our guests here in the room. So we'll start with limited control and security demands. So Jake, how do you effectively implement security measures when critical systems are managed by other departments? This seems to be a major challenge that we're faced with as cyber leaders.
I think there's a number of parts that I think it depends on who you are in the organization that you sit within. So I spent a lot of my time in startup and hypergrowth, where you have very close relationships with the engineering team, who generally own a lot of it. And I've weirdly had roles where I've managed SRE teams and various other technical teams who have had access that supersedes probably what they should have had, and were able to do things they probably weren't supposed to be doing. But I think the reality is, if you get to the crux of the question, is that it's about relationship building. I think the modern CISO role is all about your ability to operate as a business leader. And that means that you have to form those relationships based on trust, which sounds like it came from some kind of success book, but it really comes back to that. I think that we see, myself and Marius were talking earlier about the fact that what you look for in a CISO role. I think a lot of them now come from audit backgrounds, come from business consultancy backgrounds, don't have the technical skill set. One of the benefits that myself as a background from kind of penetration testing and technical security is that I can sit in a room with a CTO, and I understand what he's talking about. He understands what I'm talking about, and I can speak to and explain the problems in a way that he wants to consume them and then wants to address them. So I think there's two key parts. There's the relationship building side, and the side that says you have to have the competencies to be able to speak to and articulate the problems that exist within those infrastructure platforms that enable that person to want to help you.
Yeah.
If you can't speak their language, you're just saying because ISO says I need to. Well, I as a CTO would also tell you to get lost.
Yeah.
Right? Come armed with proper responses.
We've seen that quite heavily with like GDPR, where maybe that's been driven by privacy or legal functions, and they're trying to effectively condense, a massive thick book of regulatory requirements and needs, and I guess it gets lost when they try to work with other teams, and then they kind of alienate them. But I'm going to open this up to our room then, in terms of everyone else. If anyone wants to share a response in terms of that, like how they effectively implement security controls when stuff isn't relating to them personally or their team. Is there anybody? Let's go over to Bruce, the man with the loudest voice in the room. So I'm going to go, is it?
We might need to adjust the microphone in advance.
Annika Rice here we go. Yes, Bruce.
I'm coming from more of an external consulting base rather than in-house. So for me, it's actually observing the culture. I only bring this to life typically through cyber exercise or tabletops, where we're trying to understand what the policies and procedures are. They're saying they've got it in place, but they haven't really practiced it or implemented it in peacetime. So rather than, hang on, there's a bit of a crisis brewing, this is when people are kind of throwing mud at each other, maybe saying, hey, you didn't tell us about this new policy and procedure or this new hire or who had the responsibility or role specifically. So I think cyber tabletop exercises for me are the bits which that really could bring to life. And it's forced, again, by the business decision to practice that. Again, not all firms will go down that route. It's very different from the in-house side of things.
Just to add on to that, tabletops, surprise tabletops are like my favorite thing. Like when you have engineering teams that go, we can meet our SLA with DR, no problem. I'm like, that's great. It's Monday morning. I've literally just shut off AWS. So like, tell me how you can restore your stage environment. Go and do it. There's your SLA. You've got 2 hours. Go on. And then I want to see their document process, how they do it. Similar like instant response stuff. Tabletops are great, but I'll be like, that's great. I've just like ransomware half your systems, like go and fix it. Like actually not just like talking through it, but physically putting them under the pressure. Because then when you say, I want to do X, Y, and Z on GCP, they'll be like, why? And I'm like, well, I just showed you last week, like you couldn't deal with the problems that we faced. So if that's a real life attack, we're a bit screwed.
Yeah, I think also building that psychological safety as well, making people part of that life cycle so they understand that the responsibilities and, you know, obviously technical people pick up technical systems, that also becomes a problem. But yeah, so moving into like, Jake, what strategies have you worked that ultimately help get buy-in with the business units when it comes to controlling key platforms?
So outside of additional to my current role, I do quite a lot of advisory work as well, and spend a lot of time spent with ELTs and then with boards trying to justify security spend. The single biggest problem in security is that most security leaders cannot speak business. Like they literally fundamentally cannot do it. CISOs and security leaders and VPs have come up so quick in the industry from being less than nobodies to suddenly being parts of the ELT that none of them actually understand business fundamentals and principles. So when someone asks them the ROI, their quickest thing is, because it's going to like help you sell more. I'm like, well, that's not really a definable ROI. Like you have to explain and expound on how that works. So actually being able to speak to business mechanics, finance mechanics, to why your problem exists and how it actually resonates. Like if you you can sell more stuff or why, right? So let's say you mentioned GDPR. We're going to become GDPR compliant. We're going to do ISO 27701. Why? Because then we can sell them to the European market. We've identified that there's X percentage of customers in Germany meet our ICP and have our common problem. Their current appetite for the ACV that we are, which is slightly higher, is higher than it is in the UK or in this part of the US. So therefore that makes sense. Here's the return on investment I think you can make based on our sales conversion rate and based on our ability to deliver like a pipeline. And this is the actual realistic number I think we can get to. Yeah. And that's what I'm asking you to spend. Right? And that's an easy one. Or the flip side that says, actually, if we get breached for this specific type, here's what the last 10 companies paid that got it. If you want to pay that, that's fine. Let's hold off and let's work on the logic that we might not happen. But if you don't want that to happen, then you can just pay now. Before we even start talking about the fact that if a breach happens in A, B, and C scenario, the common churn statistic is X, and that means you've lost this much ARR, which means you've impacted your next funding round, bits C or D or whatever, by this much percent. Like being able to speak to the actual mechanics of a business is the most powerful mechanism to get security funding and to get security embedded in the leadership of the organization.
I think that's absolutely spot on. You're ultimately making it about them and the things that hurt them, rather than that kind of overarching, obviously you've spoken about the overarching business impact, but ultimately it comes to anything when it comes to controls or security or risks. If you can create a common language about them, they're more likely to obviously understand what you're trying to translate. But I'm going to open this up to our guests in terms of, is there any good advice or tips that has worked for you in companies when it comes to getting buy-in? Any takers on that? Marius, since you're looking at me, I'm gonna come over.
Just I guess to add what Jake said, I think, when you come through that technical ability, the lessons that really, you need to learn is become a good storyteller and how you can narrate, and translate. Jake talked about selling, but the other side of selling is obviously protecting your revenue stream. So you need to understand what and how business generates money. So, and what are potential risks that could impact that generation of money? What's your platform potentially, how are you selling to customers, and how much of money generates, whether it's hourly, daily, monthly, and then you can tie in risks of, how risks can potentially, create an intervention or prevent your business from reaching its end goals. And then you can tie in, it's all about, I think, the real maturity happens when you start tying in risks from, qualitative measuring to actually quantitative measuring. And then actually you can put numbers around it, say, there is a risk of £1 million that this thing, going to cause potentially £1 million of impact. Now, if your control that you're going to deploy costs 50 grand, but it's going to reduce risk by half, well, that's a very easy story to sell. You spend 50 to save 500. That's a very easy to get the board buy-in. Because that's the thing. Sometimes, as Jake alluded, you can go to the board and then, there's CISOs who tell stories about, there's 10,000 vulnerabilities. Now, nobody's going to care about that.
I think the storytelling piece is massive, right? I think that's just a general concept around how we operate as leaders, is the ability to tell a story. I rarely lead with, this is the problem we're trying to solve. I'll lead with something completely unrelated. you're looking at last org, I had a CEO who had a wife that was pregnant at the time. So I socially engineered him against the fact that his wife was pregnant by saying that she was in a hospital and it all gone horribly wrong. I know this is ethically terrible, but my point was to prove, and I never actually followed up with him at the time because I knew we had a board meeting like not long after that. So I then went to the board meeting and literally told the story at the beginning and said, this is why we have a problem with social engineering. So I think they're actually trying to create stories that resonate messages is like the key to anything, whether it's from a security piece to like selling ourselves, like everything's about being able to tell stories.
Even if you need to use the dark arts.
Yeah.
We do what we must. And then obviously we're talking about telling stories. So Jake, how do you balance security requirements with business operations that ultimately impact security? So how are you best positioned? Because you've been a field CISO, so you've been out there working with multiple different companies, working with multiple different functions. You know, how do you then convey these stories? Like, you know, we've spoken about business context. What about other areas of an organization that just don't get security? How do you transition that?
I think security people need to wake up, firstly. I think we're inherently broken as people, and our answer is no to everything. And the reality is if the business doesn't make money, then our job is irrelevant. So I'm the first to say we are a revenue enabler, and that with a massive exclamation mark. Some CISOs say it but don't really mean it. They're like a yes, but. It's not a yes, but it's a yes. Yeah. If the business isn't selling, like that's the biggest issue. If you look at the primary role of a CISO is, especially in like vendor security like I am, my primary role as a CISO is to make sure that our sales goes okay. Right? Make sure we've got the stuff in place that mean we can sell to the people we want to sell to. Make sure we've got the processes in place to get through the contractual transactional period, and make sure we've got the things and security measures in place to retain that customer. Everything else is effectively secondary. I think that's number one. Number two is learn to say yes. Like I've sat in so many rooms with security years ago. Yeah, I'm all for yes and yes, but and I'm like, you can't just say it like it's a lived value. So like AI, we managed to get about 10 minutes. AI is like the best example we can use right now. To me, like we didn't put brace to any of it. Do it. Do what you want. Like Pandora's box was open. Cat was out the bag. There's no way to secure it like retrospectively. So just let it run free and then try and educate and teach lessons. It's not a yes, but it's a yes. And also, by the way, we're now going to talk about the importance of like shadow IT. I'd rather you told me than did it by yourself. Or actually, this is how I can help you facilitate your program to make it more operation effective, because I can take your random back alley AI tool and make it operationally enterprise ready, which means you can use it actually in commercial operations. So I think you've got to say yes and not yes, but you've got to make it so they know that when they're coming to you, it's not going to be, and here's the 10 things you have to do. And you've really got to be focused on how you facilitate the business's growth. Because when you talk about like, we've got CEOs in the room, you talk about that, all they care about is the growth of the business. They don't care about your random acronym you're bringing to them or why it might cost them in a breach that hasn't hypothetically happened yet. They care about how the business is growing.
Nice. And what approaches help when it comes to influencing security decisions without direct authority?
Relationships. So if people don't trust you, they don't like you, they won't do it for you. If people trust you and like you, even if they disagree, they'll probably do it. The reality is, again, it comes back to, I've sat in a lot of technical organizations where I sit with the CTO and the engineering VPs. If I can't understand what they're talking about, I have no right to tell them what they should do in their job. And so I think a lot of it is like learn to walk in someone else's shoes, is actually generally not just learn, but go and walk in someone else's shoes. Like go and sit down with finance, understand what on the hell that budget reporting is. Or like, what on earth I had to learn what an SRE did. I didn't have a clue what an SRE did until somebody had like 6 reporting to me. Like go and learn what people do so that you have the right to then talk to them about what you do, and therefore in doing that convey hopefully changes that you want to make happen.
Nice. And I'm going to open it up to the floor. Does anyone have any strategies around helping to influence security decisions without having any direct authority? You know, it's always good to scratch someone else's back. You know, how many times have you taken someone for a coffee just to kind of get to know them, get in their head? Next thing you know, you're social engineering them, like Jake. Back to Marius, he's got a hand up.
I'd be impressed if you can buy somebody for just a coffee.
I know.
I think there's a couple of things obviously here. I think culture is very important. So, you know, you need to get leadership buy-in and breathe the culture in an organization. But there's a couple of things, obviously. It starts with accountability. So you always, speaking with the teams, you know, always say, sometimes, you know, you walk into organizations where development engineering is always think that, oh, security is going to come and fix our security problems. No. And it always starts, you know, I always start with a story saying, when you left your house this morning, did someone lock the door for you, or you locked it yourself? So you are responsible for your own security. We are here to advise and help you how to do security properly. And then secondly, obviously, Jake covered, relationships is very important. But I think on the precipice of everyone's talking about AI, I hear often that CISOs are complaining that they're not getting support or budget. And I always tell them, AI could be your unlocking key. Enable organizations to adopt AI and help them to adopt, don't say no, help them adopt AI and talk about what are potential pitfalls and risks while adopting AI. So you can be the person who's enabling organization to do AI and then become that trusted partner of organization and do security and get support of organization.
It's a bit risky to say this because my CEO is probably going to watch this and I'm currently submitting budget, but hopefully by the time we show it, he'll have approved it. But AI is like literally the best budget unlocker for security that we've had since cloud. Like, this gives us so much scope and remit to say we need all these things, because then you can open the door and say, well, actually, we need ISO 42001, and that's got a whole load of other things that I'm now going to need to do as well. So, no, definitely like utilize the problems, don't like focus on them.
Nice. And then moving into another section around CISO burnout and authority challenges. So I'm going to read some stats. I won't bore everybody with them, but there was an article recently by Forbes that was talking about CISO burnout, and the stats are actually provided by Black Fog. So 98% of respondents reported working beyond their contracted hours. I think the average CISO was doing nine hours extra. There'll be a few laughs in the background. In extreme cases, 15% of respondents were working more than 16 hours extra, and 93% were considering leaving their roles. Nearly half, 45% of respondents admitted to using drugs and alcohol as a means of alleviating work pressures, while 69% reported withdrawing from social activities. So there's a few CISOs in the room, obviously, and I'm going to tie back to you, Jake, in terms of, in your experience and in your career, and maybe some people within the industry, what would you say are the early warning signs of CISO burnout that leaders should watch out for?
You've got me here because I have opinions, so I'm going to have opinions. I think there's a lot of noise and a lot of nonsense around this space, if I'm being honest. Like, you look at a lot of the statistics and I have big question marks, and I think they come down to different things. So I think a lot of CISO burnout is caused by the things we've talked about, their inability to actually operate as proper business leaders, and therefore them getting stressed and concerned and anxious about board reporting and financial metrics and budgeting, which they never got used to until the last 5 years. So I think that's number one. I think number two is taking the wrong job. A lot of CISOs went straight from being like a security manager to like a Fortune 500 like CISO or VP, and they weren't ready for it. So naturally you're stressed because you just stepped up into a job you can't do. I think the third, and we talked a lot about over lunch, is hiring. Like, gosh, if you can hire, you don't get burnout. Like, if you hire a team that's properly resourced and properly educated and properly freed to solve problems and do what they got paid and are getting paid to do, I don't think it happens. I think that also having open, honest scoping conversations that say, this is what I do and this is what I deliver. And also, it's about like reporting metrics that you have yourself. So like, yeah, I've got a board of KPIs and dashboards for what our security program looks like, but more importantly, I can tell my CEO why I'm worth what he pays me. Like, I can put it into 5 bullet points. This is why I'm worth what you pay me.
Please share that.
But that's why. So if I'm suddenly working 20 hours extra a week, whatever your numbers were, I'm not going to, because I know what my value is. My value is delivering these things. It's not me sitting longer at keyboards. And we'll go into a wider topic. And like I said, I'm happy to have opinions. People feel free to disagree, because I know this is a controversial topic in today's society.
Yeah, if anyone wants to put their hand up, we can jump in when Jake's finished.
I think resilience itself is a questionable topic right now. I think we've just become less resilient as a human society. And we're looking to now want to have an easier life, a quote unquote better work-life balance. That means we just want to work very less and deal with less stress. The reality is that's part of the working world. Like, I'm fortunate and unfortunate in as much as a lot of my working life is spent with companies in Tel Aviv and in Israel. And like, we talk about resilience in the UK and like, oh, like these extra hours. Dude, like half of my team is currently in reservist duty. Like, they leave work at like Thursday night at 9 p.m. They're going down, they're either going north or south and spend their entire weekend on reservist duty, then coming back again, half working, half in reservist, and they're not moaning about resilience. Like, the reality is we need to sometimes look around the room and say, yes, should we be better about mental health? 100%. Should we do more to manage our own lives and like manage our health? Go running, go swimming, go for a walk rather than spending on Instagram. Like that's going to benefit your burnout ratios. Should we be better at like actually talking and communicating, particularly men? Should we be better at talking about our problems and the things that stress us? Yes. Do I think we've got a systemic resilience problem? Yes, but I don't think it's the fact that we are stressed or under pressure. I think it's the fact we've forgotten how to be resilient. Like that's just the reality of the working world. I think we want to hide too much behind, I'm burnt out. CISOs were leaving their roles every 18 months before burnout was a buzzword.
Yeah.
Like that's just how you get promoted and how you gain salary. Or you're avoiding the breach that's imminently coming because you didn't get the budget approved to fix the security problems that you know you're now vulnerable to, right? Burnout is just another way to try and like hide behind things. Is our job stressful? Yes, but I don't believe we have a resilience problem in cybersecurity any more than any other part of the world.
I like that take. And, I think quite often cyber leaders get involved in things that are just, as you said, beyond their scope, or they're not paid enough to deal with, like politics, or getting involved in things that have absolutely nothing to do with their day-to-day job. And I think that plays a part in maybe building towards that anxiety that leads to quote-unquote burnout. Anybody in the room want to give any feedback on that, what they think is early warning signs?
You can completely disagree with me. I take no offense whatsoever if you just say what Jake said is absolute nonsense.
We can get some like tomatoes and stuff, and we can hit Jake. But right, we're back to our favourite person.
Apart from Marius, because he's a lot bigger than me.
No, I'll just say two things. I think that's important. Sometimes people forget. I think it's called Eisenhower Matrix. So how to delegate and how to prioritize time is very important, because people, sometimes CISOs want to be in charge of everything. And, I say always, you hire people for a reason. So let them do their job and delegate the jobs. And I think secondly is sometimes, I think inadvertently, when you start a new job, you create problems. Like if you're answering emails at 11 p.m., you build an expectation that you're going to be answering emails at 11 p.m. and that can lead to stress. But you need to learn to set boundaries and delegate work. And I think that's how you can get successful and avoid burnout.
Yeah, give me 1 second, Claire.
Thank you. I think you're on the money there. So I'm 4 days a week, and everyone thinks that I am 5 days a week. So I purposely, during 2024, on my non-working day, when I actually take it, I put that I'm on my non-working day, and the amount of people that contact me to say, I didn't know you were 4 days a week. Yeah, because I was doing 5 days a week, being paid 4 days a week for the last 2 years. But I think we also are our own worst enemy. I am definitely a person that likes to give her whole self to anything that she gives her time to. And that's to my detriment sometimes. But I do have to say, having really been a lot more disciplined this year, I've got a lot more days in lieu because I've worked my day off and I've got them back. So I think I've got an extra 10 days in lieu than I wouldn't have got this time last year. So what I say when it comes to burnout, I would say that you also have to acknowledge that you yourself are your own worst enemy.
Yeah, and I think that comes to also like balance here. We were talking about how some UK government CISOs are paid like 60 grand or whatever. Most CISOs aren't. And the reality is you've got financially disposable means. Book holidays, like go away, like do stuff. Like I think that's part of burnout is actually having nothing to look forward to. I think as long as you always keep a holiday in quarter, I know that's not everyone's ideal, but it's mine. Then there's a way that you're always like, in a way, relaxed because you're like, I've only got to make it that far.
So obviously we're talking about the aspects of stress. So Jake, how do you manage stress and how are you accountable for life in general then? Like, talk me through some of the things that you think are really good for helping CISOs manage stress.
I am a technologist technophobe. I hate my phone. I literally despise it because it has Slack on it. So I think finding ways to avoid technology is brilliant. I happen to live in the Peak District in the north, which is great because the phone coverage is shockingly bad. So I am an advocate. I'm a big runner. I'm a massive road cyclist. And I like to get out and actually be outdoors, whether that's walking, running, riding, whatever. And I think during those times, my phone never leaves the house. It stays where it is because then I'm fully disconnected. It doesn't matter if I have that slight inkling that I want to look at something, I don't. So I think that's one. I think having your distinct lines between what you do for your enjoyment and what you do for your business and trying not to blur those or get those kind of filtering interests is another one. I think taking lots of holidays is a great one. And then I think also, well, it's not the situation for everyone. I have 2 small children, 10 and 6. And I think that is my biggest answer to burnout. Right? When you watch, play with, interact with your children on a daily basis, they are my energy source to a large degree. And I think that is a key. So if you have kids, wives, partners, husbands, whatever it might be, like I think finding that person who is kind of your energy source and spending your time doing things that you enjoy together, that's not related to your work or your aspirations or your side projects, like that's how you fuel yourself and maintain a healthy balance.
And so we're moving into building personal and organizational resilience. So components of CISO resilience, right? You're saying that, in your opinion, there isn't a resilience issue. Talk me through things like, how do you build resilience then? How do you then go against that grain? So, talk me through some aspects, whether it's things like stress management, professional development, building support networks. Talk me through how you would build your own personal resilience and organizational resilience.
So I think Marius here was the one that said it best when he said that basically, like, if you look at like a CISO who's experienced burnout and stress, most of the time it's down to the fact that they hired poorly and that they micromanage. They're too involved in all their team's daily jobs, and they hired people who need them potentially to be too involved in their team's daily jobs. So the 2 key fundamentals are hire well, hire really well. Like, it's the most important thing you do as a leader is who you hire. The better you hire, the better and easier your life is. And then don't be afraid to set them free. Even if they're doing something that you know how to do. I've given teams multiple things before. I've said, can you do this big project? And they're like, oh, do you know, how do I do it? I'm like, not going to tell you. Like, but you've done this multiple times. Don't care. Work it out yourself. Like, and that's not for any means that I'm trying not to help them, because if they come desperate with a message at 11 p.m. on Slack, I'll probably answer them. But like, the reality is you teach resilience by making people have to be resilient. And so I think you hire people who have that mindset, you give them the opportunities to develop that mindset, and then you educate and you personify that mindset. So like I said, my team knows, it's a running joke, so anyone watches this podcast, that I take like a holiday at least every quarter. So like, my team know that's a priority for me. We go with the family, we go somewhere in the world. So, and I also, again, anyone who's watching from previous companies knows that a lot of my team often have a KPI, a bonusable KPI, to take at least 1 solid block week holiday together, like during the year. And I won't pay you your bonus unless you've done that, because it's educating resilience. Like, resilience relies on you finding this balance and stuff. So I think also fostering people to do their side project, and they say, oh, I'm going to take 2 days off because I want to go and do this. I'm like, great, go do it. Like, whatever, we'll work out later what you were supposed to do during those time. Like, you've got to exemplify what you say, and then you've got to allow people to exemplify themselves. So I think you hire right, free people to do what you hired them to do, and trust them inherently. And if you have to, force them to find work-life balance. But hopefully, again, foster a culture where they feel that's right because you're doing it. And even if the CEO isn't, I don't care, because you don't work for the CEO, you work for me.
Oh, and we're back. We good? What? Okay.
Good to
Okay, some technical difficulties, but I'm going to open it up to the room as well. Like, in terms of like building your own resilience or within your organisation, does anybody want to comment on that other than Maris? You give me 1 second, Claire. I'll come over so we can get some insight around your golf. Being Scottish, I am absolutely dreadful at golf, but yes, over to you.
Scots are good at golf. You've got lots of courses. So on my non-working day, I specifically put a Slack message, we are allowed to have emoji, like a status, and I always put a female golfer emoji and non-working day.
I like it.
And so I've discovered that during golf competitions, if I have my phone on, I play really crap golf. So I have to switch off my phone. Whole 4 hours I am out on the golf course. It is brilliant. I love it. For a number of different reasons, but I absolutely love golf.
You're more patient than me. I feel there's 2 corporate hobbies in the world. There's golf and there's cycling. Golf requires like patience. Being on a bike doesn't. It just requires you to want to suffer. So that's why I went to the latter. I didn't have your patience.
You sat very well.
Mentally suffer.
And obviously, while we're on the subject of resilience and security culture, and I actually might come back to you, Claire, at some point, because I know in the past we've spoken about building good security cultures. You've got some really good stories on the back of that in your own company. But back to you, Jake, in terms of what techniques have worked in transforming security from a necessary evil to a business enabler?
Tie it to revenue growth.
Talk me through it.
You want more detail? No, but I said it comes back to this concept that if you can't talk, every business wants to sell stuff. Whatever they're doing, they're selling something, right? And the reality is, I don't know who claims this analogy because it's been given by a lot of people, but theoretically it might have been Heinz who said, like, when I buy that product, how many more cans of beans will I have to sell, right? Lots of companies have claimed that this was them originally. But you want to say, well, because I'm doing what I'm doing, how many more cans of beans can you sell? Right? And I think, oh, how many more cans of beans of value have you got? So I think that trying to interpret your role, your spend, your activities, your team, based on how that drives business growth, not ROI on potential risk, not ROI on the potential breach cost, not ROI on this regulatory requirement we may or may not have. It's today, unequivocally, how will that drive revenue? If you can give a firm argument that supports that being true, it really doesn't matter what you're asking.
And do you have any examples of how that can be done? Hey, we get 10 million attacks today. The reason we spend 100,000 is to stop the attacks, because if they get through, then it's going to equate to loss of business of X revenue, that kind of example.
Which is a good one, but that again is still even hypothetical. It's based on the fact that someone has to attack me. If they don't attack me or none of them get through, or I can't demonstrate that already my controls aren't reasonably sufficient, you want to go back to enablers. So you look at security, regulation is our best friend. I don't like regulation, but it's a great enabler because you look at NIST coming, it's theoretically come out, but will become more enforceable soon. Well, that's a massive enabler. If you are critical infrastructure, which, by the way, everyone appears to be critical infrastructure, regardless of what you do under NIST, then you say, well, if I actually apply these concepts and regulatory controls and laws to the business, we can sell into the British market, into the UK market. The UK market is worth X dollars to us. The likelihood of us closing business is X. The pipeline will grow is this. Our conversion rate is this, and therefore we'll get this many dollars. The program will cost this much. It's 5%. It's an absolute no-brainer. That's the real business enabler, and that's the problem. I think that, not that there's anything wrong, but most CISOs go straight to well, I'm going to save you this much if this happens. The argument shouldn't be I'm going to save you this much. It's going to be, regardless of what happens, I'm going to make you this much.
I love it. And then I'm going to move over to Claire around security culture, because obviously we've spoken in the past, and for everybody else who wasn't in the room at the time of that conversation, talk me through, Claire, about some of these really good programs that you've had in your organisation to help foster security culture.
Thank you, Leo. So I do it very differently to most of the CISOs. I use carrot rather than stick. And I have completely transformed the culture of my company off the back of offering a £5 reward for reporting, for the first person to report a genuine phishing email. My company love it. I get reports of literally anything and everything now. But I would much rather that than them click on a link. And it's been so successful. And we tell people about it in the induction. It's one of the first things. So there's two groups of people that are currently being targeted by phishing: my accounts department and new joiners. We tell new joiners pretty much straight away that they'll be targeted, and that they all get a £5 Amazon voucher because they all get targeted of the back of it. So you get buy-in from day one is all I'm saying. And I have just extended it to our engineering team, not around phishing, but obviously my engineering software development team are a big risk in my company. They see stuff on a day-to-day basis. We've had a number of near misses, but I've just agreed with the CTO that we will offer them a £5 reward for reporting genuine issues in our code. And so far, the people that I've mentioned it to absolutely love it. The thing that I need to be wary of, apparently, is that
self-created code, self-created bugs.
That's exactly what I need to be wary of. And there is going to be a caveat when we do roll it out, that if it's determined that somebody has actually created the issue in the code, they will be out of a job.
Your employees are incredibly cheap. So I love the idea. We did internal bug bounty hunter programs at every company I've been at, and it's the only way I could find to get engineering to fix stuff that we were throwing over the wall without them having any time in their cycles to fix it. So we created an internal bug bounty hunter program that only engineering could use. They couldn't do their own code, it had to be someone else's. And it couldn't be stuff that they'd been asked previously to remediate in a pen test result. But we then set up a scoring system. We didn't give them money immediately. We set up a scoring system. Then every 6 months, we gave whoever was the top 3, we gave the choice of Xbox, sunglasses, and a hotel night. And like, I've never had vulnerabilities remediated at the speed and volume in my life. It was amazing. We had people I had like engineers resolving critical vulnerabilities like 2 a.m. And the same guy won like an Xbox 3 times. That's a different conversation. I'm not sure what happened from that. But yeah, cheap at £5. I should try them.
Listen, I think Claire's going to be very, very busy at the sprint leading up to Christmas, I think, as well. And obviously, you know, you're going to run out of Xbox.
But if her team watches this podcast, they're now going to be saying, £5, you're having a laugh.
I know. Those guys are getting Xboxes and we're getting £5.
Sorry.
Let me see, where can we go next? So yeah, obviously we're speaking about team culture and security culture in general. You know, Jake, do you have any approaches that help maintain team morale during security incidents or high pressure periods?
I think those are 2 different questions.
Yeah.
I think team morale, teams are families to me. Like anywhere I've left, I'm still in touch with everyone who's been in my team or I've reported to. Like I think that you create cultures of genuine relationships that aren't based on like your job requirements or whatever it is. Like your team should feel they've got your back. Your team should have seen you argue with your boss at some point about them getting a pay rise, right? You have to create genuine relationships. You know you're like inside out their personal lives as well as they're willing to share them. Like, and you develop meaningful, real relationships where you have like outside events and meals, whatever they are, where you don't talk about work. So I think you need to create those and create like a real culture of trust, not just one that's written in success books. I think incidents is a different thing. Pressure scenarios, that takes a bit of time per person. And I think it comes down to, do your team know and trust you can do that? So I've been in multiple incidents for luck or whatever. And you have to be able to stand in that room and say to a CEO and board, stop, get out, I've got this. Like, and to know how to follow that process, to command the voice and to control the lawyers that want to tell everybody, the marketeers have already sent the email out, the CEO who's like already telling his shareholders, like, you need to be able to control that rhetoric and have dominance in that room. And if you do that, the team will always have inherent trust in those situations and won't feel the stress and the pressure because they know that you've got a process that you will follow and you've got control of it.
I love it. I'm going to open it up to the floor. Oh, Bruce, here we go.
There's a man that's been in some incidents.
Oh, I know.
Thanks, Leo. Yeah, I mean, I've probably done I've stopped counting, but north of 700 small, large, and global type incidents.
Okay, you win.
And crisis. No, it's definitely not. No, I'm one of probably many who've done this. But normally when I get parachuted in on that kind of the first 24 hours, normally it's where the internal teams haven't been able to control the situation. It's then escalating. The first thing, I think, Leah, we mentioned this, or we spoke about this. I normally ask the teams very openly on that first kickoff call, well, I'm the external party helping the internal. I'm not pointing fingers here. We need to get through this as a team. You don't know me or my colleagues who are being parachuted in to help you. Who's tired? Who's exhausted? It's one of the first things I ask. I'm trying to build trust very quickly. Not to say I've done this many times. It's going to be painful. There's a bit of heartburn. We'll see it through. But again, it's trying to forge trust with kind of core teams who are very, very exhausted. And normally this is on a Friday happening to the Saturday. And we've got Thanksgiving, I think this Thursday in the US, and they've had a long weekend. So it's probably quite timely. But that's just my sense. There's a lot more dynamics, unfortunately, that come to play depending on the severity. There's different personalities. But really it's to try and help the incumbent team. No, look, we'll get through this. It's unfortunate. It will be okay. Just we got to get through this process.
The last 3 breaches I've been involved in, they've all happened between 2 and 5 a.m. on a Sunday morning. All of them without fail.
I liked Jake's point a second ago about the ultimately being authoritative and taking control of a situation. I think that shows your team as well that you've maintained a handle on what's going on. And also Bruce's point about building a psychological safety of like reassuring people to tell them like, you know, hey, who's tired, who needs a rest, you know, and kind of building that trust barrier, which I think is super important in any culture. And then we're going to move on to our last question because I know Jake needs to run soon. But how do you measure and demonstrate progress in building a security-aware culture?
There's easy and hard ways to this, qualitative and quantitative. Quantitative is not very hard. You look at phishing response rates versus industry benchmarks and best practices. That's really easy. That's just showing a culture is secure and the security aware. You can also look at the reduction or metrics of code vulnerabilities that are caught in the last stage before pushing production. So therefore, have they been involved in secure by design concepts, and have they been aware of these things like OWASP top 10, etc. during the development process? So there's lots of easy metrics. I think the qualitative one that's hard is how many people in the room come to you. So a good CISO is a job that underpins the whole business now. Like a CISO is a weird role because you seem to support everybody in some way or capacity. So I think how many people in the building the hypothetical building come to you to guide them on things, and how many people have good things to say about you and your team. As qualitative, it's a bit hard to get hold of, but I think that's the more important one than the quantitative metrics around vulnerabilities and phishing tests, because that's the one that really says how embedded are you and your team within the organization, within the culture of the business.
I like it. Sounds like I need to create a new Jira tag tomorrow in work, so I'll be getting that into my board. And again, it's a good measure. Yeah, I'm going to open this up to anyone else if they want to discuss. Failing that, we'll wrap up. Anybody want to talk about any measures? No, okay. Well, we'll wrap up then.
Proof that nobody likes KPIs.
Yeah, or like nobody's even mentioned an OKR. OKRs are really good. They stretch goals as well and show progress in a multitude of different flavors. But yeah, so we'll wrap up. So it's a goodbye from me in terms of the Declo podcast. Special thanks to Jake, who's been an excellent co-host today, and also to Metomic for sponsoring today, and to our excellent guests who are here in the room. I don't know if everybody on YouTube can see them, but there you go. And again, thank you everybody for your contribution and making this a great event. So yeah, thank you. Cheers.
Thanks.